report shows the significance of Greenville's housing crisis by digging into the numbers of people experiencing homelessness in the county.
Well, Fox County's Kennedy Harris read through the report. She joins us live now to break down some of the key points. And Kennedy, really seems like a growing issue here.
Yes, and for the first time, this report gathered 2022 data on everything from street outreach to families at risk of homelessness, giving us the best look at homelessness in the county, what they're doing right, and what gaps need filling.
Homelessness is going in the wrong direction. It's a growing issue here in Greenville.
Behind each number in this report is a story.
The report shares that our team touched base with more than 300 individuals across Greenville County who were experiencing homelessness.
Lorraine Crowell is the chair of the Upstate Continuum of Care. She says not only will this report add perspective, but it will serve as a guide.
We know that we have to focus on housing families. We know we have to focus on getting people out of shelter into a housing opportunity.
Affordable housing is key. The report found Miracle Hill, the county's only shelter, is at 92% capacity on average.
We actually see more people with what we would say is a disabling condition versus someone who may be experiencing a substance abuse condition.
Last year, hundreds of people left the shelter, moving to permanent or temporary housing, but many others can't find a place to go.
We are getting close to capacity, and so the challenge is, what do we do now?
Crowell says the county's used about 6 of the 12 million American Rescue Funds, providing rent and utility assistance, preventing homelessness for more than 2,000 families. The majority in need of that funding have been African American single mothers.
On the verge of living in their cars or living in hotels or other situations. And so, that's an alarming number. So how does a family making $17,000 a year afford an apartment that costs $2,000 a month? It's just not feasible.
McKinney-Vento data shows more than 1,300 students were considered homeless in 2022.
There's an increase in families who are sleeping in their cars.
Seeing the numbers helps see the gaps in service.
We need to go in communities and find solutions that work for them, not solutions that work for us. And I think that's where we've fallen down.
And the report was put together by the Upstate Continuum of Care. Advocates will now push this report to city, county, state, and federal leaders in hopes of securing more funding. Crowell is also working to connect with local pastors and community leaders to find ways to reach people who need help.